Welcome to another edition of From the Press Box, part of the WHPC Sports Talk family. My name is Rob Leonard. Joining me is award-winning sports writer Tim Leonard. And yes, we are brothers. And we're doing an interview today, brother. We got actually two interviews today on this show, October 15th, 2018. We have Kristie Ackert. We're going to talk about the Mets in the second half of the show. In the first half of the show, a topic I love talking about, the United States Football League. I remember. I don't know if you remember, Tim. I like the USFL a lot.
Yes, you are all usually a fan of the new leagues. the weird.
Well, I don't know. About weird,
it was a little weird.
Anyway,
but it was they made a good effort. It was a league that was going places until Donald Trump showed up.
How surprising.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a new book about this league called Football for a Buck, The Crazy Rise and the Crazier Demise of the USFL. And the author of the book, Jeff Pearlman, is joining us. Jeff, welcome to From the Press Box. How you doing?
I'm good. You know, there's also a relatively new book by Rick Wilson called Everything Donald Trump Touches Turns to Crap, or something like that. And
even if that's not a real title, it should be.
Yeah. If there actually is a book, I swear to God, I think it's called something like that. Anyway, yeah.
And we should say Jeff Pearlman's also the author of the Bad Guys Won.
Yeah.
A great book about the 86 Mets, about the craziness of the 86 Mets, one of the great teams of all time, of course. Tim will disagree with that. But
no, they certainly were one of the greatest teams of all time. There's no disputing that. But they were also a pretty insane cast of characters.
Yeah, and they've never been that insane since either, unfortunately.
Well, because people would get arrested if they were that crazy today.
Leading the way, Lenny Dykstra.
Yes.
Jeff, I always start off when we talk to authors, the first question always is, why did you write this book?
Well, I mean, I was a huge USFL fan as a kid.
Okay.
I'm kind of like like you would just describe. Like I love. I'm a fan of obscure leagues and like startups and sort of the idea of taking something that didn't exist, throwing a bunch of characters in it, and seeing what happens. And I'd always been fascinated by the USFL. And when I was a senior in high school for my final project for my English class, we did a 20-page paper on the subject of our choice, and I did the USFL, except I wrote 40 pages.
Wow.
I was just all about the USFL. So I've been begging to write a book for years and years. I had proposals, and I talked to different publishing houses. Nobody ever would take one. And then a couple of years ago, I wrote a Brett Favre biography, and I took less money to do Favre from Houghton Mifflin in order to write a USFL book. So here I am.
Okay, it's a very well documented book about. I don't want to call it a crazy league because they actually ended up influencing the NFL in many ways.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can countless ways. 2-point conversion, coaches challenge, salaries, 4 NFL Hall of Famers. They signed 3 Heisman Trophy winners in a row. Funky uniforms allowing players to celebrate the way football was marketed. And I say the biggest one in many ways that a lot of players are unaware of and probably should be is when you look at the salary explosion in pro football. It happened in the mid-'80s when USFL came along, and all of a sudden the NFL had a challenge to it. So, when Le'Veon Bell signs for a huge amount of money, he should be looking back. I mean, he wouldn't, but he should be looking back at the USFL and thinking, "Wow, the salaries really took off."
Yeah, those guys paved the way for sure as far as the salaries that we're getting today. And like you said, Le'Veon Bell just announced a couple of weeks ago that he's planning on coming back. What was it, week 7 or week 8? Because he doesn't want to take all the punishment. But this is a guy who's making $15 or $16 million this year, prorated, of course, at this point. But I'm sure he has people like Steve Young and Calvin Bryant and guys like that to thank.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. It really, it came along at a time when the NFL could control there was nowhere else to go. So I always think a very good example is Doug Williams, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback. Mm-hmm. He was a starting quarterback in the NFL. He was a very, very good player. Going after the 1983 season, I think he was the 48th or 49th highest paid quarterback in pro football. He's miserable in Tampa Bay, but you're kind of stuck there. Now suddenly the Oklahoma Outlaws come along and they want a quarterback, and they're willing to pay. And suddenly Doug Williams jumps to being, I think, the 4th or 5th highest paid quarterback in pro football. The USFL gave a lot of players that sort of financial opportunity that they otherwise didn't have.
But in a lot of ways, I guess that kind of was the downfall of the league. Obviously, they wanted star players and they wanted names and they wanted to have that kind of recognition. But at the same time, the contracts that started being given out in a much more accelerated pace than they had planned, that kind of led to the downfall of the league.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, you mentioned before, Donald Trump's involvement killed the league, but they definitely spent too much money too quickly. They expanded from 12 to 18 teams after 1 year, which was really dumb. They weren't, there was a point during the 83 season when the Michigan Panthers, who ultimately won the first championship game, they were a 500 team. And the owner of the team, Alfred Taubman, just lost patience. And he signed 3 former Pittsburgh Steelers offensive linemen for huge dollars. Mm-hmm. And at that point, a lot of the other owners were like, well, why should we show patience if these guys aren't showing patience? So, it all of a sudden, everyone started spending, and not everyone, but a lot of teams started spending, and it got out of control. And they definitely, the original idea was keep it slow and steady. Spring football, we're going to grow slowly. We're not going to spend crazily. And once they lost that, they sort of were heading off the tracks.
There was a plan, though. Donald Dixon, the guy who started the USFL, he had a step-by-step plan. Could you go into what some of those steps were? Because you look at it, it's pretty well thought out.
Yeah, his name was David Dixon.
David
Not
Dixon,
to be confused with Donald Trump, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. And, the plan was smart. I always think the plan was smart. The plan was basically, all right, we're going to play spring football. And this whole philosophy was, or his whole way of thinking was, the only reason football is a fall game is because the first game ever, Princeton-Rutgers, was held in the fall. And since then, that was a tradition. But why? So we're going to play spring football. We're going to have regional drafts. So a team in Philadelphia is going to be presumably loaded with guys from Pitt and Penn State. And you're going to have regional fans who love, these kids in high school and college, follow them to the pros. Each team can sign 1 or 2 marquee players, but otherwise we're going to be really smart with our money. And maybe it's not going to be NFL caliber at the beginning, but it's going to be the guys who are on the fringes of the NFL. And then slowly over time, as the league succeeds, we'll be able to spend more. But again, they sort of abandoned that very quickly. Basically, after the first season, they went from 12 to 18 teams. And they weren't going to do that, but each expansion team paid $6 million. So they got greedy very quickly and loved the idea of the influx of capital. And it really, again, it was pretty disastrous.
Yeah, that's typically in a lot of fledgling leagues. And from my own personal standpoint, I covered Major League Soccer for several years. And that's a league that has kind of gone down that same road in that they've probably expanded more than they ever wanted to already. And they're still taking expansion teams, but it's because of that franchise fee. And right. They're almost kind of, they're still, I mean, despite the league has been around for more than 20 years now, they're still kind of on precarious ground because they're still relying on those franchise fees. And there's only so much you can expand.
Well, you know what it is? It's easy to tell. It's easy to say, okay, we're going to lose money. We're going to start by losing money. I get it. Like that, it's easy to say that.
Right.
It's a total different thing to actually experience it. So you're a guy who's used to making tons of money and you've done very well for yourself and blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm going to be patient and I'm going to, this league, we're going to ride out for the long haul. Well, then you start losing money and then you see, we're going to get a lot of money if we just add more teams. It's sort of it takes a lot of sort of resistance and patience to not follow that path once it's offered to you. So it's understandable, but it's self-defeating.
One of the things that this league had that some other startup leagues didn't have was they had ESPN contract and they had an ABC sports contract. Yep. And that was good money. I mean, it wasn't great money, but it was good money. And from what I've read, in other places also, ABC was happy with the fact that they were a spring league. and they liked it because it gave them programming. And ESPN was happy for anything because they were showing Australian rules football at that time probably. So the ABC ESPN contract, those separate contracts, they weren't owned by the same people then. It was very important to this league, and I'm not sure why they didn't realize that down the road. When we'll talk about it later, how they want to go fall, but how they didn't just realize, hey, this is good money coming in.
Yeah, I mean, the TV deal was definitely flawed. The biggest thing was they didn't have a blackout clause, which
right.
was a problem. But yeah, it was a new league with 2 networks showing its games, and what happened really is the league's first commissioner was Chet Simmons, who had been the head of ESPN.
Right.
And they brought him in, and I think they first negotiated the deal. Then they brought him in, and they thought he was going to be able to do stuff with TV, that unrealistic things. They thought he was going to be able to just take their deal and make it a million times better and blah, blah, blah. And, then, to fast forward a little, Donald Trump comes along, and he's telling them all, your TV deal is crap. I can get you a better TV deal in the fall. I know I can. I guarantee you. It's going to be so easy. It's going to be so easy, blah, 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 blah. So he makes these promises about getting fall TV deals and all the riches in the $90 million contract. But the networks didn't want the USFL in the fall. They already had the NFL. USFL to them was like nice, quaint, low-risk programming. It was better than what they had. It didn't have to do amazingly well, and they were going to be happy to have it sort of instead of, like you said, instead of bowling or ping pong or whatever ESPN in particular was broadcasting. So I just think they had a good deal, and they didn't really appreciate it for as good as it was. They got greedy quickly.
We're talking with Jeff Pearlman. He is the author of the new book called Football for a Buck, The Crazy Rise and the Crazier Demise of the USFL, published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And we're talking with Jeff about the USFL, the United States Football League, just for those who didn't know what U.S. might have stood for. Some people don't know. They're like, just letters.
Ugly sister.
Yeah, ugly sister. Why not? Now, going back to the first season was actually pretty good. I thought the second season got a little better, actually. Even though they...
Yeah. Well, they had better players. All of a sudden, you had Steve Young, Jim Kelly, Reggie White, Mike Rozier. There was an influx of really good players the second year. They had some bad... they expanded in some really dumb markets. They expanded to San Antonio, and they expanded to Tulsa. Those did not make sense. Again, they were greedy and a little quick on it all. But, the league was really thrilling and really entertaining. And if you look back, I hate when people compare it, like they'll say, so it's like the XFL. And I always say the USFL was nothing like the XFL. It was a far superior league with far greater talent. Almost 200 guys went on to the NFL from the USFL. So when people say that, it actually kind of pisses me off.
I don't blame you. I covered the XFL for a year, and I can certainly agree with what you're saying as far as the talent. It was well below. It wasn't even Arena Football League standard.
Right. Well, also they had individual owners in the USFL, while the XFL was owned by Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the joy of the USFL. They had characters, very much like the ABA. 15 years later or 10 years later, however you want to look at the end of the ABA, if you think about it, because the ABA, Loose Balls is a crazy book about the ABA for those who never read it. And my question for you, by the way, Loose Balls is a great format. Had you thought of doing that type of format as a writer? For those who don't know the format, it's basically just the answers without writing, basically. What would you call it, Tim? What would you call it? Tim, you give me
I'm not sure what you're just talking about.
It's an oral history.
Oral history, thank you.
History,
okay, I wasn't sure the official term.
Where are you going with this?
Okay. Had you thought of maybe doing the book like that, or was there other things you wanted to show? Because certain things you can't show in oral history because it's...
Well, I thought of it briefly, but Loose Balls is such a great book, and the books are sort of similar content-wise as far as crazy upstart leagues with, insane stories and, nut job personalities. I just didn't think, I didn't want to do the same book as
right.
he did. That Terry Pluto